Hello and welcome to On the Mark Financial Literacy with Mark Zinman. Hello, Mark.
Good morning, Monica. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? You're down the shore today.
Well, it's a summer version of On the Mark. So let's explain some things that'll happen here. Number one is you may hear a dog or two bark in the background. We're dog friendly, and actually Alicia usually has her dog Pudgy in the room with us, but Pudgy's smart and good dog and doesn't usually bark. We should probably haven't heard him on other episodes. My dogs, not so much. So we have 3 dogs here. We're down the Jersey Shore. So you'll notice I have a different background. Hard to get the On the Mark background, but we'll hopefully have the same content and same meaning as we usually do.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to you and to your 3 co-hosts then.
Yep.
On today's episode, Mark will be sharing his thoughts on budgeting, including budgeting for young adults. So Mark, just to set the table here, budgeting is incredibly important for young adults. It provides a roadmap for managing income, expenses, savings, ultimately leading to greater financial security and independence. And we'll talk about all of those things today. But total monthly reliable income is our starting point as we create a budget. Would you agree?
I would agree. And how we would define that, especially for young people who probably only source of income would be their job. And for the example I'm going to use, I'm just going to assume one job. It just makes it easier. But basically, most people get paid. There's 3 ways to get paid. You get paid weekly, you get paid biweekly, or you could get paid semi-monthly. The overwhelming prevalent one would be biweekly in the United States. Some people are weekly. So I'm going to more address those two. And what I want people to do is their reliable income is going to be their net payroll for the month, excluding extra payroll. So if you're bi-weekly, you would have 26 payrolls in a year. So 2 every month and 3 months with 2 months with 3 payrolls. And similarly, if you're weekly, you'd have 48 weeks of 10 months of 4, 2 months of 5. Okay. So we're talking about the lesser one. So we just want to do the 2 payrolls on those people that are biweekly, or the 4 weeks if you're weekly. If you're semi-monthly, you can't have any extra reserve. It's going to be same thing, two payroll checks. And that's going to be defined as your net payroll after any of the deductions taken at the job, regardless of what they are. And when I say regardless, you could have 401k, you could have health insurance, you could have cafeteria, you could have other things in there. We're starting out with net payroll.
Okay, so that's what we have to work with.
Correct.
So what are some of the line items that should be included in a budget?
Well, basically, a budget should include everything you can think of. But the categories need to be designed into ones that you can easily know an expense fits in. So like clothing, food, utilities, which could include gas, electric, water, depending on what you pay, rent, a mortgage, your car payment, lease or own, your insurance, and the type of insurance. It could be life insurance, it could be homeowners insurance or renters, it could be auto insurance. And you want to try and break this down into as many specific categories as possible so that you can define what you're paying it by category and be able to easily review what's charged in a category for later on for analyzing whether you're staying in budget or where maybe you have some issues or where you may need to adjust your budget.
Okay. And then as we create a realistic budget, we can further compartmentalize those line items or those categories that you're referencing as needs, savings, and wants. So let's start with needs. Can you define different types of needs, such as expenses and debt repayment?
Well, needs. A need is something you have to pay. Okay, you need to have a place to live, so you need to pay rent. You may have a school loan, so you need to pay your school loan. You may have come into this budgeting process with some credit card debt, so you need to pay off your credit card debt. I would include that you also need to budget for savings, that is a need as well. And the idea, stepping back for a second, the idea of only including 2 payrolls or in a month or 4 is that the extra payroll that you're not including, which could include the extra 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on how you're paid, maybe a Christmas bonus or holiday bonus from your work, will all be money that is unattached and will help you fix the budget later. But certain needs are like so the worst. There's good debt and bad debt. We've talked about this before. Student loan debt is just a process of how you got to where you are. You may have student loan debt. Nobody goes out and borrows student loan debt and doesn't use it for school. So it's how you got your education. So student loan debt just needs to be a monthly budget. A car loan, you need a car. So, if you could either lease or buy a car. If you're buying a car, then you're going to have a monthly payment. And that's not necessarily bad debt. That's just a monthly expense. What is bad debt is credit cards. They're the most evil. And when I say they're evil, it's because of the interest rates. You're looking at 20 to 30% interest rates. You're looking at theoretically spending money. So we talked earlier about expensing your expenses by category. Well, the stuff that you charge, how you pay it doesn't change the category. So if you wrote a check out for your insurance or you charged it on your credit card, it's still the same expense. If you bought clothing with a check or cash, or you put it on a credit card, it's still clothing. So we count the disbursements, the money you pay out, as that expense. And the methodology of how you do it is immaterial. I have no problem with people using credit cards to get their rewards or their travel or whatever their perk is, so long as you're able to pay off that credit card at the end of every month out of your budget. And on top of that, if you came into this program and you're starting your budget today after listening to our podcast and you have credit card debt, that is the first place you pay off. Over savings, over everything. Like if you were going to budget for savings, that savings should go as additional principal on the credit card. And why? Because if we get a savings account, maybe we'll get 3 or 4% interest or less. You're paying 20% for the credit card. So you're losing money by not paying down the credit card. The other evil part about credit cards that where you have a revolving balance is you tend to be charged interest on your purchases and don't get the same grace period you do when you pay it off. So if I was to have my balance paid off and I charged $100 today, I wouldn't be charged interest until I didn't pay the $100 on the due date. If I had a balance and I charged $100, then I get charged interest up to the time I pay it or the next cycle, whichever is longer. And so it has a compounding effect of that 20 or 30%. So needs are anything that you can't live without. For your normal life, food's a need. What kind of food may be a want, but food's a need. So just think about anything that isn't elective as a need.
Okay. And you touched briefly on savings, and perhaps you could do a little bit of a deeper dive into the type of savings. We might have short-term savings, longer-term savings, and an emergency fund separate from a short-term savings. Can you talk about those three?
So it's always better to have your money working for you. And so I remember we'll evolve over the last 50 years. I mean, years ago, when I was younger, my parents used to have envelopes, right? My dad would cash his paycheck and they put money in each envelope because things were paid by cash back then. So he'd have a food envelope and a clothing, all the different things. So now we're going to have the same thing. And a lot of your expenses are not going to be the same every month. For example, you're not going to be buying this 1/12 of your clothes every month. You're not going to have 1/12 of your utilities because we have a season. So certain months may be higher utilities than others. The idea is that we don't want you to have money sitting in your checking account for no reason. So the first type of savings you could have is the excess money that's in your budget that you didn't spend that month, maybe because it's deferred, should go into a savings account. And what's a savings account? It could be a money market. When we're talking about savings for which we have a future need to pay for it, it's always going to be short term. You can't take any risks. You can't go out and buy stock. You can't go put money in a mutual fund because next month might be that utility bill. Next month might be something that you are behind on your budget and you have to borrow from one category to another. So that goes into savings. Okay. The same thing with what I said, budgeting for savings. That should go into a savings account early on until you gather enough money together for two things. Number one is to show that your budget's valid and you can live within your budget and you didn't miss something, because budgets are going to be, especially early on, they're going to be living, breathing things. The best way to come up with a budget, those categories, is to go back and look at 3 to 6 months of your previous spending, assuming that you're already in a consistency. Like you rented an apartment 6 months ago, now you're jumping into a budget. Those expenses should be sort of normalized within 3 to 6 months. And that's how you start your budget what did I spend? And then what's that add up to? And does that exceed the monthly cash flow? And if it does, then you got to cut. But if it doesn't, then maybe the difference goes into savings. Maybe you start putting that money away for something else. And we can talk about that in a minute. But basically, we want your bank account, your checking account, to be emptied. Now, what other kinds of savings are there? Well, the other kind that really is prevalent is 401k. That's long-term, that's the retirement. We've discussed that in other episodes. Basically, that's money we call it's savings, but it's basically savings that you aren't allowed to touch ever. Once you put money into a retirement account, I've used the term in earlier episodes. I like the word wealth building account. It's sort of the rainy day. It's sort of like somewhere way down the line. Hopefully you get to be retired and therefore you can take your retirement money, but it's also wealth building for maybe later in life with something else that can't be funded any other way. So, and in my example, when we discussed how you're going to get to your monthly cash, that 401k would already have come out because I said net payroll. The other thing about that is very important is that usually employers match in 401k. So the minimum you want to do in a 401k if you're eligible is what the employer will match. At Zimmern and Company, we have what's called a 4% match. So it's 100% on the first 3%, 50% on the next 2%. So for every employee who puts at least 5% in, the company matches that with 4%. So what is that? 80% rate of return. It's even better than credit card debt, right? So, and then obviously, if back in the day, they had things like vacation funds and stuff like that. You could have a savings for something else. You could have a savings for your vacation, and we'll get to the needs, right? The wants, but have money for other things while not necessarily committing to it.
And what about an emergency fund? The refrigerator dies, you need new tires. Does that come out of a short-term savings, a long-term savings, or is that its own category? What do you recommend?
Well, it depends on where you are in life. So we talked, you started this episode off by talking about budgeting for young people. And the tighter your cash flow is, the more need there is for a budget. Now, everybody should have a budget because you should at least have an understanding of where your money is going. But certainly if you're comfortable enough that you can do, within reason anything you want, that means that you'll be fine on your budget, but you still need the budget. And for people that are younger, all those things like we talked about, a vacation fund, the savings that we told you to save, maybe the excess in your budget over the month, those could turn into an emergency fund. It depends on how far we are in. Certainly, when you're a little older and if you own a home, the emergency fund for people who own homes is a home equity line of credit. So we're very strong. So the biggest illiquid asset that you have is going to be your home. Okay, so if you have, because we can get into talking about how much of a mortgage you have on your house or something like that in another episode. But let's say, for example, you have $100,000 of equity in your house. You can't go chip a brick out of your front of your house and go to Giant and buy food. But you could have a home equity line of credit. And an emergency fund is just that. It's for emergencies. It's for something that you never thought was going to happen. I'll give you an example. My son called me last week and said, our something's going on with our air conditioner. And so they called somebody out. Turns out the air conditioner was put in 2002, needs a new compressor. And it's $10,000. But he knew years ago that it was a ticking time bomb when he bought the house 5 or 6 years ago. So they had the money saved. He doesn't want to spend it, but that's what it was there for. So he already kind of like knew he needed it and funded that for this expense. And then he has a home equity line of credit. So he said to me, Dad, would you pay it on the home equity line of credit or would you pay it from the savings? And my answer is you pay it from the savings. Why? Because the savings is only going to be paying 2 or 2.5%, maybe 3%. And even on a home equity line, you're paying prime, you could be at 8 or 9%. So we always go for like total cost. And my advice to him was, well, your savings is going to be short. If you need something else, then you go to a home equity line. And if you were a type of person who had to use a home equity line for an emergency, a water heater, a big major repair on your car, something you didn't expect, then you would adjust your future budget for how fast can I pay down this money? Like, where's the money going to come to get me back whole again and then back from what they call when you're in the deficit, the red, and when they call you surplus, the black, how do you get from the red to the black?
Okay. Thank you for that. We also want to budget for some of our wants as is possible, and perhaps we could categorize them as small wants and larger wants. Small wants would be an example of, eating out. Larger ones would be vacations. And so there is some overlap in the Venn diagram here of, what you would consider savings and what you would consider a wants. Can you speak to that a bit? And can you also speak to the accessibility of those funds? Where should you hold that money?
So I'll use my son as another example. When he graduated school, he got a job and he would work like 8 or 10 hours a day, and he'd come home and he said to me after a couple months, Dad, I get up at 6 in the morning, I go to work, I don't get home till 6 or 7 at night, I'm tired, I eat dinner, I go to bed. Is this what adult life is like? And I think most of us adults would probably say yes, but so I really think it's important to budget something for once. Okay, and that could be the eating out, it could be your Starbucks coffee, it could be going dancing, it could be a vacation. But you have to make choices. I mean, if you want to go on a vacation, maybe you have to make your coffee at home and bring your lunch instead of eating out. You just understand something. There are very few people. Television tends to make everybody look like they can do whatever they want, and you're the poor person who can't. Trust me, that the grass is always greener. Everyone has financial struggles, and almost everyone I know needs to make a daily choice on wants versus needs versus which one do they want more than the other one. So I think that the younger generation has more of they want to do it all, and they want to do it before they get too old so they can enjoy it. And I want you to do that, but you have to just sort of still balance it. Pick and choose is the best thing. And as far as savings accounts, I'm fine with you spinning up 3 or 4 savings accounts and have them earmarked. The excess on your budget, your vacation fund, your wants, your emergency fund, and just sort of seeding them based upon your budget so that you have these pockets. It doesn't usually cost anything to have a savings account. If you have it at the same bank or financial institution or credit union, there's usually not a charge, and you can transfer online and move money back and forth. I do that all the time. So you're talking to somebody who has a mortgage. My mortgage is due tomorrow. I had that money sitting in a savings account for the month. Why? So I can, because I'm selfish and I want to earn my extra $2 that I would have gotten if I left it in. It wasn't much money, but it's just more the mental thing that you're sort of doing it right. And look, I'm an older person, right? I'm your father's age for the younger people, and I'm still doing it. So, okay. Budgeting throughout your whole life.
Yeah, right. And your financial goals will change and evolve over time throughout your whole life. So appreciating that we should review and adjust our budgets at regular intervals. What are some other life events that might prompt an official budget review?
Well, I'll talk about the American dream type of thing, because everybody's going to go on a different journey. But let's just talk about a year. You graduate school, you get your first job, you get your first thing. Somewhere down the road, you meet your significant other. You move in together. You might start buying property. You might have a family. All those events change your budget, right? Hopefully, you're making more money, buying a house, having a child. They all add complexity and choices. And they're also going to change your needs and wants, right? You need to buy diapers. You need to buy formula. You can't want to. Hopefully, you get people to hand down lots of baby clothing, because that seems to be what's out there a lot. But you're going to need a lot of things that you don't have. And hopefully with 2 incomes, if that's what it is, or just the growth in your profession, you may have more money, but it's going to change the categories we talked about. It's going to change how you allocate. You may have to start thinking about things like daycare, 529s for school. I mean, there's a bunch of unfortunate adult stuff that you have to deal with as you go think. So when it's just you, it's very simple. It's just what you need and what you want. When you have a significant other or a dependent person, then it's what they need and what they want, and that influences what you can do. So yes, I early on in a budget, we said, okay, you go back and you'll start budgeting based upon the last 3 or 6 months of actual expenses. Going forward, you will measure that against what you actually incur, and then you'll start making choices like, do I want to have nicer clothes? Do I want to have go to an off price place or a bargain place to buy certain things in order to save here to do that? So I could have, and that all flows into it, because once you handle all your needs, then all you got left is wants, right?
Right.
The good stuff.
Right.
Good stuff. But yeah, budgeting, and we talked about in an early episode about the financial life and saving money and wills and estates, and all that starts to play into affect your budget, because you have to fund those items as you get to the point in life where you need to do that.
Yeah. And budgeting helps you make intentional financial decisions. So another reason why it's so important.
It's interesting. So I got to use it from a business point of view. I look at a lot of business expenses on different clients, and I'll see like somebody spent X amount. I spent an X amount of dollars on some category, and I'm like, how the heck did I spend that kind of money? And then I look, and all of a sudden the details tell me like, oh, that's right, I did that. That's right, I did that. So making an intentional expense and then documenting that so you can go back and review gives you a lot of power. And you don't want to be a victim to your situation. You want to command your situation. Yeah. I mean, I use an example of a client who called me, and they had a lot of credit card debt. And, they said, Mark, is there some way you can help me refinance my credit card debt? And I think she had like $30,000 of credit card debt. And it was a lot. And I said, well, we need you to make a budget. And I gave her the methodology for making a budget, and we talked on and off. And she came back to me finally and said, listen, I did the best I can, but my budget's a deficit of $400 every month. And I said, well, you have two choices. Make more money and get a second job, or you've got to find a way to cut your lifestyle, because you can't run deficit every month just on your needs, right? And her reply to me was that she had been looking for a part-time job, but really didn't find anything she liked. So two problems with that. Number one is that's sort of a cop-out in the sense that you aren't a victim of that. You would pretty much do anything you can to make money if you needed it. And the second issue is there's no way to pay off credit card debt if you can't at least pay the current monthly bills. You're just going to keep increasing your credit card debt, and eventually you'll hit a wall where you're not allowed any more credit. So you need to take control of that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. Getting into that situation is bad. Getting out of it is very important.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So still a good segue to a question that was posed to us by a person named Chris out of Richmond, who asks if every expense needs to be accounted for in your budget. And that gets us to common budgeting methodologies. I'm a huge fan. I myself use zero-sum budgeting. There's also the 50-30-20 rule. Do you want to answer Chris's question through one of those two methods, and what are the pros and cons of each?
Well, I'll start with Chris's question because it doesn't necessarily 100% feed into the other two. You need to budget listen, if you say I'm going to have $50 a month $50 a week for spending money or pocket money or whatever you want to call it, I don't think you necessarily have to account for it if you don't want to, because you've already said that's what it's for. So, but at the bigger things you have to account for. I mean, if you're taking cash out and using that cash to buy something that's a category, yes. If the $50 is your wants and you want a Starbucks today, you don't necessarily have to account for it. You have to account for the fact that you don't want to spend more than $50 in the example I gave. As far as the budgeting, the 50-30-20, I don't like that methodology because it assumes that if you can't stay within the 50, you're not doing it right. 50% wants, right? It's 50% wants, 30% needs, and 20% savings. Well, there's plenty of young people whose wants are going to be closer to maybe 80 or 90% to start off with. There's things when you get out, buying furniture, furnishing your apartment, having all the supply. They're all one-time expenses, but somebody has to pay them. Now, maybe you'll get lucky and have a family member who helps or get some hand-me-downs, but there are going to be expenses when you're outfitting your first apartment or your first home that maybe you want to do yourself, and it's going to be something you're going to do once. And so, you're going to have to budget that. So it's very possible that when you're a younger person starting out, you'll be well over 50%. And I don't want to put a label on somebody who is that, but is still following the guidelines and good financial literacy by doing a budget. Zero-sum budget is sort of what I've been talking about, which is basically at the end of the month, your budget's zero, right? And how does it get zero? Mark, I'm not spending my budget because you moved it out of your checking account, right? It's in the savings account. It's in I budgeted $300 for stuff that's deferred. My insurance, my car insurance, my buying clothing, and my vacation. Okay? Well, that gets put away somewhere so that you don't spend it and don't think you have more money. one of the biggest problems I find, and it's not necessarily for individuals, this goes to businesses too, they tend to judge how well they're doing by what their bank balance is, as opposed to what, I have a client who could have $15,000 of checks outstanding that he already wrote and mailed out, but that balance in the morning is how much money he has in the bank. Meanwhile, we all know that if nothing happens, $15,000 is going to come out within a few days once people cash those checks. It's very common, and I don't think it's a matter of intelligence. I just think people see that number and say, "Oh, I feel good," and then you'll live on an emotional roller coaster. I mean, your rent comes out automatically on the first of the month. Well, today it looks great. First of the month, it's going to look really like what happened to my money. And it happens to us too. Like, I'll look at my bank account and it'll look really good one day, and the next day it'll look like terrible, and I'm like, what cleared? But at least I know what cleared. So you don't want to live based on your bank balance, and you also want to do your best of trying to stay within that budget. And so at the end of the month, the money's put away, and you're reevaluating even from month one what month two needs to be to fit better. And just don't be hard on yourself. It may take a couple months to get used to it and to really hammer the numbers down, but you really have to cut down your wants and fill your needs, and just tighten that. They call it tightening your belt. It's sort of a way of tightening. It doesn't mean you have to do it forever. And you don't have to, call your dad and say, "Is this all there is to life?" Like my son. You'll find some other stuff if you can find a way to get into this budget, and you'll feel better, because a lot of times I'll talk to people and they'll feel like there's. I've called it in a cubbyhole accounting, right? Cubbyhole financing, where you have, and I just imagine like those little cubby holes where you put your bags in when you were in school, and each one's a financial thing, and you need to put money in there. And anytime you're not filling one of those cubby holes, you feel bad. You feel inadequate. So it's rare for a client to ever be able to say, "I am perfectly comfortable with everything I'm doing." There are always going to be some shortcomings, but as long as you feel like you're addressing it in some way and not deferring it. I have clients that put $100 a month in a 529, and they know that the school is going to cost more than $100 times 12 times the number of years their childhood thing, but at least they feel like, I'm doing something. Mm-hmm. Put money into retirement, even though you basically could use that to help your expenses, because you're doing something. And so that's the whole thing. Make sure you're doing something, and you'll feel better about yourself, and you'll feel like you have control over your stuff instead of everything controlling you, which is really what the message should be. Is you are your own person, you're responsible for yourself, and you need to take control of it and not be a victim to circumstances, but basically the king of your own domain, right?
Okay, well, very strong messaging. Thank you for that. And we've added some budgeting tools to the website onthemark.cpa. If anyone would like to visit them while you're on our website, please feel free to submit a question that we can feature on a future podcast. We thank you for joining us today and look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
Enjoy your summer if you're down the shore.
All content provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only. No representations are made as to the accuracy or completeness of information that is presented. On the Mark, its owners, collaborators, and guests will not be liable for any errors or omissions, nor for any losses, injuries, or damages from the use of this information.